The summer sun baked the earth until even the shadows seemed to crack. Dust clung to Eleanor Ellie James's dress as she dragged a pail of water from the well, her leg aching with every step. The limp had been with her since she was 7, a wagon accident that left her with one leg shorter than the other. Her mother used to say it made her walk like a song out of rhythm. But her mother had been dead for years now, and there were no songs left in this house. Her stepfather, Clyde James, leaned against the porch rail, chewing a sliver of straw and watching her with the cold impatience of a man who had already made up his mind. He'd taken her mother's land after marrying her, worked her to death, and now that the crops had failed, he had only debts and a crippled girl left. "You move slower every day," he muttered, spitting into the dust. "No man would marry you. No hand will hire you." "I can't feed mouths that don't earn." Ellie didn't answer. Talking back only earned her bruises or a night without supper. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than pride. That evening she sat alone by the hearth, the smell of scorched beans filling the cabin. Her younger half-brothers laughed in the next room, unaware or uncaring that the woman cooking their meal hadn't eaten since dawn. She touched her leg where the scar pulled tight and whispered a prayer she'd almost forgotten how to say. The next morning, Clyde was waiting with 2 rough-looking men beside a wagon. One of them wore a long coat despite the heat and held a bag of coins that jingled when he moved. "Get your things," Clyde said flatly. "You're going with them." Ellie froze. "Going where?" He didn't meet her eyes. "They'll take you east. Maybe someone will have use for you there." "Sell her, you mean," she said, her voice trembling. His jaw tightened. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You cost more than you're worth." The words struck deeper than any blow. She looked toward the house, hoping her brothers would speak, but they just stared at the ground. The man in the long coat grabbed her arm, his fingers like iron. "She'll fetch good coin in Bisbee," he said to Clyde. "She's young. Pretty enough face if you don't look at the leg." Clyde nodded. "Just take her." The coins clinked between their hand, the sound of her life being traded away. Ellie's throat burned, but no tears came. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. They shoved her onto the wagon, and as it jolted forward, the house grew smaller behind her. The sky stretched endless and cruel, and the wind carried the scent of dust and betrayal. She tried to remember her mother's voice, the softness of her hands, but even that memory felt stolen. For 2 days the men drove her through dry canyons and empty plains. They barely spoke except to mock her limp or toss her scraps of food. When they reached a trading post on the edge of Apache land, the driver called out, "End of the line, girl." A few ranchers lingered near the corral, watching with lazy interest. Ellie felt their eyes crawl over her as the trader shouted, "Got a strong one here. Bit slow on the leg, but she'll work for cheap." Laughter rippled through the crowd, until one man stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair tied back, his eyes unreadable. He wore a worn leather coat and carried himself with quiet authority. An Apache, clearly, but dressed like a rancher, not a warrior. The trader smirked. "You buying, Chief?" The man ignored him. His gaze stayed on Ellie, steady, piercing, and strangely gentle. He didn't look at her limp or her dirt-streaked face. He looked into her eyes as if searching for something hidden there. "How much?" he asked finally. The trader chuckled. "She's damaged goods. I'll take $10. Without a word, the man pulled 20 from his coat and set it on the post. "She's not damaged," he said. His voice was calm but carried a quiet thunder. "She's mine now." For the first time in years, Ellie's heart stuttered with something other than fear. She didn't know who this stranger was nor why he'd bought her, but in his eyes she saw no pity. Only truth, as if he already knew she was worth more than what the world had decided she was. And in that moment, the journey that would change both their lives began. The trading post buzzed with the low hum of voices, wagon wheels creaking and dust swirling through shafts of golden light. Ellie sat stiffly in the wagon, heart pounding as the tall Apache rancher finished the transaction. The trader snatched up his coins, grinning wide as if he'd just unloaded dead weight. Ellie didn't know which burned worse, the insult or that no one around seemed to care. The Apache turned to her. "Come," he said quietly. His tone wasn't harsh, just certain, like a man used to being obeyed without raising his voice. Ellie hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she had nowhere to go. The desert stretched endless and merciless beyond the trading post. With trembling fingers, she clutched the small cloth bundle she'd been allowed to keep. Her mother's handkerchief, a broken hairbrush, and a Bible with torn pages, the last pieces of a life already gone. He led her toward his horse, a magnificent bay stallion with a black mane that shimmered in the sun. A second horse followed, smaller and gentler looking, its saddle already packed. "You can ride?" he asked. Ellie swallowed hard. "A little," she said, her voice rasping from thirst. He nodded once. "You'll ride beside me." When she winced climbing into the saddle, his hand came to steady her, strong and steady but respectful. It startled her, not the touch itself but the restraint behind it. Men like him didn't help women like her. She didn't understand what he wanted, and that frightened her most. They rode in silence for hours. The sun dropped low, painting the desert in copper and rose. Coyotes cried in the distance. Ellie tried not to think about where he was taking her. Finally, when she couldn't bear the silence anymore, she spoke. "Why did you buy me?" He didn't answer right away. The rhythmic sound of hooves filled the pause. When he finally spoke, his words were simple. "Because no one else saw what I did." Ellie frowned. "And what did you see?" He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "A woman who was not beaten yet." She turned away, heat rising to her cheeks. "You're mistaken. I'm no one. My stepfather was right. I can't work, not like others." "My leg," he cut her off gently. "Your leg does not stop your heart." They rode on, the air between them thick with things unsaid. When night fell, he stopped beside a shallow creek and began to unpack supplies. Ellie dismounted carefully, her leg throbbing. She sat apart, wary. He lit a small fire and roasted strips of dried meat, the smoke curling into the dark sky. When he handed her food, she hesitated. "Eat," he said softly. "You've had nothing since morning." Ellie accepted it, too tired to refuse. The taste was smoky and rich, and she realized she hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. After a long silence, she asked, "What's your name?" "Tazanez," he replied. "And you?" "Eleanor. But people call me Ellie." "Ellie," he repeated slowly as though testing the shape of it. "It means light." She blinked, startled. "How did you know that?" He smiled faintly, the first hint of warmth she'd seen in him. "Names have meaning. I learned the English tongue long ago." When the fire burned low, Taza spread a blanket for her beside his saddle. He did not touch her, did not even look her way again. He simply sat with his back to the fire, watching the stars as if keeping guard. Sleep came slowly to Ellie. She'd expected cruelty, commands, or the rough hands of another man who thought kindness was weakness. Instead, she found only silence, and a strange, careful peace she couldn't name. In the morning, she woke to birdsong and the scent of coffee. Taza was already saddling the horses, his movements quiet and efficient. When she tried to stand, her leg gave out slightly. "Slowly," he said, steadying her again. "The trail is long, but we'll reach my land before nightfall." She wanted to ask why he cared, why he spoke to her as if she mattered. But his gaze held something unshakable, a certainty that made her chest ache. As they rode again through the awakening desert, Ellie caught herself studying him. The calm strength in his shoulders, the quiet dignity in every motion. He wasn't like the men she'd known. There was no arrogance, no cruelty, only purpose for the first time in her life. She wondered if perhaps her story wasn't ending after all, but just beginning, in the company of a man who saw truth not in what was broken, but in what endured. And though she didn't know it yet, this silent purchase would become the first act of love she'd ever known. The first glimpse of Tazanez's ranch took Ellie's breath away. Rolling hills stretched toward jagged red cliffs, dotted with grazing horses and scattered adobe structures. The air smelled of earth, sweat, and freedom, a stark contrast to the stifling cabin she had left behind. Even the wind seemed kinder here, brushing against her skin like a gentle hand. Taza guided her to the main house, a low, sturdy structure built of sun-baked clay and timber. Inside, the rooms were simple but clean. There was no hint of luxury, only a sense of purpose. Each piece of furniture, each tool had a reason to exist. For the first time, Ellie felt that order did not mean oppression. The Apache people she met there treated her with a mixture of curiosity and quiet respect. Women nodded politely as she passed. Children stared wide-eyed, and Taza's niece, little Nayeli, tugged at her skirt with shy fascination. None of them laughed at her limp or whispered insults. Ellie felt as though she had stepped into a world where her disability was irrelevant. Taza assigned her tasks suited to her strengths. She tended the horses, brushing their coats and feeding them, her leg making the work slower but not impossible. She taught Nayeli to read from the Bible and other scraps of books Taza kept in a small shelf. Every time Nayeli learned a new word, Ellie's chest lifted with pride. Here, she wasn't the crippled girl. She was a teacher, a caretaker, a part of the rhythm of the ranch. Taza rarely spoke more than necessary, but Ellie began to notice the little ways he watched over her. He observed when she struggled to lift a sack of grain and silently shifted it to a smaller bundle. He left water beside her during the midday heat and walked at her pace during long rides, never rushing, never condescending. His attention was not pity. It was a quiet, steady acknowledgement that she existed and mattered. One evening after a long day, Ellie sat outside, her hands caked in dirt, watching the sunset paint the cliffs in shades of fire. Taza appeared with a small jug of water and 2 cups. "Drink," he said, handing her one. She took it, meeting his steady gaze. "You'll learn," he said softly, "that being strong is not about legs or arms. It's about standing when the world expects you to fall." She blinked back tears, unaccustomed to someone speaking truth to her without anger or pity. She wanted to thank him, but the words lodged in her throat. Instead, she nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest she hadn't felt in years. Over the next weeks, life at the ranch became a pattern of small miracles. She learned to ride with more confidence, even letting go of the fear that had haunted her since the accident. Taza's people shared stories of their past, of hardships and victories, and Ellie listened, realizing that suffering did not define a person. How they faced it did. One afternoon, she tried to mend a fence, wincing as her leg ached. Taza approached silently, a hammer in his hand. "Let me," he said. In the few moments it took him to fix the post, Ellie realized she had never known kindness without expectation. He wasn't helping to win her favor. He was helping because it was right. By the time the first rains came, Ellie felt herself changing. She moved with more assurance, spoke with more confidence, and laughed more freely. Small sounds that startled her own ears. And always Taza was there, a steady presence, watching, protecting, never demanding more than she could give, never dismissing what she had already endured. One night, as firelight danced on the walls, Ellie thought about her old home. The cabin, the stepfather, the family who had called her a burden. It all seemed like a distant dream. Here she was not a commodity to be sold. She was not defined by weakness or circumstance. Here, she was seen, and she began to understand in a quiet, trembling way that being seen was the first step toward being loved. Ellie had grown accustomed to the rhythm of life on Tazanez's ranch, the early mornings when the horses stirred and the sun painted the cliffs in gold, the afternoons spent tending animals, mending fences, or teaching Nayeli to read. She had begun to feel a sense of belonging she hadn't known existed, yet the man who had rescued her remained a mystery, a shadow at the edge of her life. Taza was always present but never intrusive. His eyes seemed to notice everything, how she moved, how she spoke, how her shoulders tensed when she feared failure. And yet he rarely shared his own story. Ellie had asked once during a quiet evening by the fire, "Why do you stay here so far from everyone?" He had looked at her then, his dark eyes reflecting the flames.
"This land."
"It is mine, but not in the way you think. It is not just land to be owned. It is responsibility, and a refuge." Ellie had nodded, sensing a depth she could not yet grasp. There was pain there, she knew. A weight he carried like the sun-baked stones he moved in the fields, but he never complained, never let it touch her. She felt it in the way his shoulders stiffened when strangers came near the ranch, in the cautious tilt of his head when he studied the horizon. One afternoon, while repairing a broken fence at the edge of the pasture, Ellie overheard whispers from 2 neighboring ranchers who had come to trade goods. "You know he's half white," one said. "Never trusted by the Apache fully. Never accepted by the whites. Claims land, wealth, horses, but he's alone and he's dangerous." The words made Ellie pause. She hadn't thought about it. Hadn't questioned the rumors she had heard in passing. Alone? Dangerous? She glanced at Taza, who was working silently, his face set in concentration. "Why would someone like him buy a girl like me?" she muttered under her breath. Her hands shook slightly as she returned to her work. She could feel the weight of curiosity pressing against her chest. That night she found herself sitting near the fire, hesitant but determined. "Taza," she said quietly, why did you really buy me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he poured 2 cups of tea and handed her one. The steam curled around his fingers, softening his usual hard edges. Finally, he said, "Because no one else did. You were being cast aside, treated like property." "I do not buy property." Ellie swallowed, confusion and gratitude warring inside her. "So, you saw something in me?" He nodded, a faint crease of his brow. "I saw strength. Not in your body, but in your spirit. You endure. You do not bend under cruelty, and that is rare." Ellie's chest tightened. She wanted to say more, to ask about the life he had led, the scars he carried, but words failed her. Instead, she simply nodded, feeling the weight of his honesty like a bridge forming between them. Over the following days, Ellie began to notice the subtle ways his past shaped his actions. He avoided unnecessary conflict with neighboring settlers, but he defended his people fiercely. He spoke of treaties and honor as if each word carried a lifetime of experience. When she stumbled or faltered, he guided her, not with impatience, but with patience honed by years of hardship. One evening, as the sky burned with the colors of sunset, Ellie asked, "Were you ever hurt?" Taza looked out over the pasture, silence stretching between them. After a long pause, he said, "Yes, but the wound that matters is the one I cannot show. I have built this place to protect what is right, not because I am strong, but because I must." Ellie felt a shiver of understanding. She realized then that the man who had saved her was not merely a wealthy rancher. He was someone who had endured his own battles, someone who saw the value in her where others only saw weakness. His kindness was not empty. It was forged from survival, from choices made under pressure, from a life that demanded courage. For the first time, Ellie understood. Taza's strength was not just in muscle or land, but in the clarity with which he saw the truth in others, and in his eyes she felt seen, truly, completely, without judgment. As the night settled over the cliffs and the ranch fell into quiet, Ellie knew that she was no longer merely a girl who had been sold. She was part of something greater, something alive with respect, courage, and the unspoken promise of protection. And she understood that to Taza, she mattered not because she was rescued, but because he had chosen to see her. The evening air was warm, scented with sage and the smoke of burning wood. Taza Nez's ranch buzzed with energy as the Apache people prepared for the harvest celebration. Horses were tethered near the corral, children darted between stalls, and the sound of drums began to rise in steady rhythm. Ellie had never seen anything like it. Her life before had been narrow and harsh. Here, the world seemed wide, full of possibility. She lingered near the edge of the gathering, hesitant. The women danced gracefully in colorful skirts, their feet beating in time with the drums. Men sang low, rich songs, calling out in Apache and English, voices strong and vibrant under the open sky. She wanted to join, to feel the rhythm in her own body, but her leg ached and she feared the mocking whispers of strangers. Taza approached quietly, moving through the crowd like a shadow. He stopped beside her, his gaze steady. "Do you dance?" he asked. Ellie shook her head, embarrassed. I can't keep up." "You don't need to keep up," he said. "Just move with the beat." Before she could protest, he held out his hand. Something in his calm, unwavering presence made her trust him despite herself. Hesitant, she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle, a promise of support rather than command. The drums rolled deep and resonant, and Taza guided her to the center of the circle. Her heart pounded with fear and excitement. Every eye seemed to fall upon her. A newcomer, a stranger, a girl with a limp. But Taza's gaze never left her, steady as a lighthouse. "Just follow me," he murmured. Slowly, Ellie let herself move. Her steps were cautious at first, unsure, but Taza adjusted, mirroring her movements, making room for her limitations. The rhythm of the drums seemed to seep into her limbs. For the first time, she felt her body respond not as a burden, but as a vessel of expression. Around them, the circle of dancers seemed to blur. Faces softened, the laughter of children mixed with the beating drums, and Ellie's fears melted away. She laughed, a pure, unguarded sound she had not heard from herself in years. Taza smiled faintly, his eyes lighting with quiet amusement and admiration. "You move like wind with purpose," he said. Ellie's cheeks flushed. I never thought I could dance like this. Dancing is not about perfection, he replied. It is about presence. You are present. The night deepened, stars glittering over the red cliffs, and Ellie felt a strange, joyful freedom she had never known. She wasn't the crippled girl her stepfather had sold, nor the timid outcast she had feared being. Here, in the firelight and drumbeat, she was seen, and she was capable. Taza guided her through more steps, and slowly, Ellie began to improvise, letting her body find its own rhythm. Each movement was a statement. She belonged. She was not broken. She was alive. And as they spun, the firelight flickered across their faces, catching in Taza's dark eyes a tenderness she had begun to understand but could not yet name. Finally, the drums slowed and the dancers bowed to one another. Ellie's legs ached. Her breath came in quick bursts and her face was flushed with exhilaration. She looked at Taza, expecting only instruction or criticism. Instead, he offered her a smile that was neither pity nor expectation, but something entirely new. Acknowledgement. You danced well, he said simply. Ellie felt a warmth spread through her chest, deeper than any comfort she had known in years. In that moment, she realized the truth. Taza did not see her for what she had lost or what she could not do. He saw her for what she was, courageous, alive, and full of untapped strength. As the fire crackled and the celebration carried on, Ellie let herself savor the feeling, holding Taza's steady hand for just a moment longer than necessary. For the first time in her life, she felt that she had a place and perhaps, though she didn't yet dare to name it, a connection that might grow into something deeper. The night was theirs. Under the stars with firelight and drums, a dance that marked not only celebration but the beginning of a bond that would shape both their hearts. The days after the harvest celebration were quieter, but no less transformative. Ellie moved through the ranch with a growing confidence, tending horses, mending fences, and helping Nayeli practice her reading. Each task, each small accomplishment, chipped away at the fear and doubt that had clung to her for years. Yet despite her progress, she often caught Taza watching her from a distance, his dark eyes assessing, calculating, understanding more than she could ever express. One morning, a sudden fever struck the ranch. It started with the horses. One by one, several began to falter, their breathing labored, eyes dull. Panic rippled through the ranch hands as Taza barked orders, trying to isolate the sick animals and ensure the others remained healthy. Ellie sprang into action, moving swiftly between stalls, fetching water, mixing herbal remedies from the small medicine chest Taza kept, and tending to the horses with a care that surprised even herself. She worked without pause, ignoring the ache in her leg, the sweat stinging her eyes, and the heat pressing down from the relentless sun. Hours passed, the dust clinging to her skin, muscles burning, yet she refused to stop. She couldn't explain why, only that she had to, as if the ranch, the horses, and Taza depended on her. Perhaps they did. Taza watched from a distance at first, letting her prove herself. But as the day dragged on and the sun began to dip low behind the red cliffs, he approached. His boots crunched in the dust as he came near, his presence steady and commanding. "You've done well," he said, his voice calm but carrying a depth of respect that made her chest ache. "Few have the strength to endure what you just did, and yet you didn't falter." Ellie shook her head, exhausted and breathless. I was just doing what had to be done. I didn't think about strength. He held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Strength is not only physical," he said. "It is in the choices you make when it would be easier to give up. You have it and you never doubted." Her heart stuttered at his words. No one had ever said such a thing to her. Not her father, not her stepfather, not even her mother. For years she had been told she was weak, a burden, someone to be discarded. And now this man, this Apache rancher, was telling her that she was not only capable but remarkable. She looked at him then, meeting his dark eyes for the first time without fear. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. He saw more than the limp that had defined her life. He saw courage, endurance, and a fire that refused to be extinguished. Her soul, raw and tested, was visible to him, and he acknowledged it. Taza's expression softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through his usual stoicism. "They said you were broken," he murmured almost to himself. "But I've never seen anything more whole." Ellie felt warmth flood her chest. For years she had felt invisible, ignored, or pitied. Now in his presence she was seen, truly, completely, not for what she lacked, but for all that she was. The ranch settled into quiet evening sounds, horses breathing in their stalls, the wind rustling dry leaves, Nayeli humming a lullaby in the distance. Ellie stayed by Taza's side, her thoughts tangled with gratitude and awe, and for the first time, she realized that being truly seen was a kind of love, not the desperate affection of a family that had discarded her, but the recognition of her worth by someone who understood her spirit. She met Taza's gaze, and in it, she glimpsed not pity, nor expectation nor judgment, only truth, and it filled her heart with a courage that no hardship, no cruelty, no past betrayal could ever take away. For the first time in her life, Ellie believed that perhaps she had been waiting not just to be rescued, but to be understood. And in that understanding, a bond began to grow, quiet and unspoken, stronger than any fear or past sorrow, a bond that would change the course of both their lives. Ellie had begun to feel at home on the ranch. The wind through the red cliffs, the scent of horses, and the warmth of Taza's quiet presence had become a balm to years of fear and rejection. She moved with a confidence she had never known, her leg no longer a symbol of weakness but a reminder of resilience. Yet as much as she tried to bury the past, it had a way of catching up to her when least expected. One hot afternoon, as she watered the horses, a cloud of dust rose on the horizon. At first, she thought it was one of the ranch hands returning from the distant pastures. But as the figures grew closer, her heart sank. A familiar, cruel voice called out over the wind. "Ellie, you there, girl?" Her stomach twisted. It was her stepfather, Clyde James, flanked by two lawmen. The sheriff's badge glinted in the sun, and Ellie's pulse raced. She froze, gripping the water bucket like a lifeline. Memories of the cabin, the harsh words, the trades, and the bruises flooded back. Taza's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. "Stay calm," he said quietly. His eyes narrowed, dark and protective. "We will handle this." Clyde's voice rose in anger. "I demand she be returned to me. That girl is my property." "You stole her?" The lawman looked uncertain, glancing at Taza. The crowd of ranch hands and neighbors gathered, murmuring. Ellie felt a pang of fear. For a moment, she imagined being dragged back to that cabin, sold again, treated as worthless. But something inside her shifted. She had endured enough. She would not be silent. Straightening her back, she stepped forward, her voice strong despite the quiver in her throat. "I am not property," she said. "I was sold by a man who called himself my father because he thought I was a burden. And now I am here, of my own right, with Taza Nez. He did not steal me. He saw me and he knows the truth," the crowd murmured. Some nodded, impressed by her courage. Others whispered, surprised to hear her speak with such authority. Clyde's face turned red. "You ungrateful girl. You will listen." Ellie held her ground, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. "I am done being silenced. I will not go back. I am strong enough to make my own choices. You have no right over me." Taza stepped forward, tall and imposing. His presence alone commanded attention. "She speaks the truth," he said firmly. "She is under my protection. She is free and you will not touch her again." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "He's right," he muttered. "She has been living here. She is not a ward or an indentured servant. There is nothing to return." Clyde sputtered, anger and humiliation twisting his face. He glanced at the gathering crowd, realizing his power had evaporated. With a growl of frustration, he turned his horse and rode off, muttering threats that fell on deaf ears. Ellie exhaled, trembling, relief and adrenaline coursing through her veins. Taza came to her side, his hand brushing hers in a gesture that was both protective and grounding. "You did well," he said softly. "You spoke with courage. That was no small thing." Ellie looked up at him, gratitude and something deeper flooding her chest. She realized that she had found not only safety, but someone who truly believed in her, someone who saw the woman she was beneath the scars and the past. The sun began to dip behind the red cliffs, painting the sky in shades of fire. Ellie stood beside Taza, no longer the frightened girl sold for being disabled, but a woman who had claimed her place in the world. The past had come for her, yes, but it could not take away the life she had chosen. For the first time, she understood fully. Strength was not measured by what had been done to you, but by how you stood after it. and she would never again let anyone define her worth. In the quiet that followed, with Taza at her side and the ranch around them safe, Ellie felt a certainty she had never known, that her future, finally, was hers to shape. The summer sun had barely risen when Ellie noticed the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. They rolled in fast, heavier than any storm she had ever seen in the desert, swallowing the red cliffs in shadows. The wind whipped through the corral, rattling gates and tossing hay into the air. Horses whinnied nervously, their eyes wide, hooves stamping the dirt. Ellie's heart tightened. She knew storms like this could devastate the ranch, flood the low pastures, drown the livestock, and undo months of hard work. Taza was already outside, moving swiftly among the horses, checking the fences, and barking orders to the ranch hands. His face was set, calm but determined, the same way it always was when facing challenges. Ellie rushed to join him, her leg aching from the previous day's work but her resolve stronger than ever. "We need to secure the foals and the smaller animals," she shouted over the rising wind. Taza nodded, his gaze sweeping the fields as if he could see the danger before it arrived. Ellie moved with urgency, gathering the frightened foals and leading them toward the safety of the corral's inner pens. Rain began to spit down, first in small drops, then in sheets, turning the dust to mud underfoot. The wind tore at her clothes and hair, but she refused to stop. She couldn't. She wouldn't. Suddenly, a loud crack split the sky, a lightning bolt striking near the edge of the pasture. The startled foals bolted, their legs slipping in the mud. Ellie ran after them, calling out, but one small foal slipped into a deep puddle, floundering. Without thinking, she lunged, her legs sliding on the slick ground. "Taza," she shouted, fear slicing through her chest. In an instant, he was there, moving faster than she thought possible through the storm. He reached her just as she lost her balance completely, grabbing her waist and pulling her against him. Mud spattered across her face and clothes, but his grip was firm, unwavering. The foal struggled but managed to scramble to safety with Taza's guidance. Ellie trembled, her chest heaving. I almost," she began, her voice breaking. "You didn't," he interrupted softly, his voice steady amidst the chaos. "You were brave. You acted without fear. That is what matters." She looked up at him, drenched and shivering, and saw something she had never noticed before. Vulnerability hidden beneath strength. Taza's eyes were fierce yet tender, reflecting the storm around them and the quiet care he felt for her. She realized then that he had been watching over her all this time, not with fear or possession, but with a devotion that demanded nothing but her safety. The rain fell harder, drenching both of them, but Ellie felt a strange warmth in the storm's chaos. For the first time, she understood the depth of his protection and the unspoken bond growing between them. He didn't see her as disabled or fragile. He saw her courage, her resilience, and the fire that refused to be extinguished, even in the storm. When the worst of the storm passed, the ranch lay in chaos, waterlogged pastures, scattered hay, and wet, shivering animals. But the foals were safe and the fences had mostly held. Ellie leaned against Taza, exhausted, muddy, and trembling, yet alive in a way she had never been before. "You were incredible," he said, brushing mud from her hair. "Your fear didn't stop you. That is strength." Ellie met his gaze, seeing reflected there not judgment, not pity, but respect. And something more, something tender that made her heart skip. In that moment, soaked in rain and mud and adrenaline, she realized she trusted him with not just her safety, but her spirit. As the clouds began to break, letting slivers of sun light the muddy ground, Ellie understood the truth she had been learning for weeks. Courage was not just surviving cruelty or illness. Courage was standing in the storm, leaning on someone who saw your strength and letting yourself be seen in return, and she had never felt more alive. The morning after the storm, the ranch was quiet, save for the soft nickering of horses and the drip of water from soaked roofs. Ellie moved among the paddocks, checking the foals and mending fences. Her clothes were still damp, her hair tangled and clinging to her face, but she didn't mind. The storm had left a strange clarity in the air, the kind of clarity that comes after chaos, when everything feels sharper, closer, more alive. Taza appeared beside her without a sound, his boots sinking into the softened earth. Ellie looked up, startled, and he offered a small, reassuring smile. It was different from the commanding presence he usually carried. It was softer, quieter, and somehow more intimate. "You handled yourself well yesterday," he said, His eyes held hers, steady and unwavering. Most would have panicked. You did not. Ellie's chest warmed at the praise, but she shook her head, embarrassed. I only did what had to be done. No, he said firmly. You acted with courage. Not out of duty, but out of instinct. That is rare. Her heart fluttered in a way she couldn't name. For weeks she had felt his attention, his quiet recognition of her strength. But now, in the aftermath of the storm, it seemed different, heavier, deeper, as if he was acknowledging not just her actions, but her heart. Taza dismounted and handed her the reins of a horse she had tamed herself, one that had been frightened by the storm. Ride, he said. Show me how far you've come. Ellie swung onto the horse, wincing slightly at the reminder of her old injury. But as she guided the animal through the pastures, she felt a surge of pride. Her body moved with purpose, her balance steady, her confidence blooming. Taza followed, walking beside her, his presence a silent encouragement. When they stopped at the edge of the cliffs overlooking the valley bathed in morning light, Ellie slid from the saddle. Taza watched her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. She had been trained to hide her emotions, to shrink, to be invisible. But standing there, with the wind in her hair and Taza's gaze upon her, she felt seen in a way that went beyond recognition. It was understanding, acceptance, and perhaps something more. Taza, she began, her voice soft, uncertain. I don't know what I would have done without you. He stepped closer, the sun catching the dark strands of his hair. You've done more than survive, he said. You've grown stronger than I ever imagined. And Ellie's breath caught. The way he spoke, the gentleness in his eyes made her heart race. She had been sold, abandoned, and dismissed for years. Yet here was a man who not only believed in her but admired her courage and spirit. He continued, voice low and steady. I have seen what others could not. They called you broken, but I see a woman who carries fire in her heart. And that fire, it has grown brighter than any hardship you endured. I love you, Ellie. Not for what you were, not for what others thought of you, but for who you truly are. Her eyes filled with tears, unbidden and warm. For so long she had been invisible, undervalued, and discarded. Now this man, this steadfast, honorable man, was telling her she mattered entirely and unconditionally. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say nothing, he replied. Let your heart answer. Ellie felt something shift within her. She had been afraid to love, afraid to trust, afraid to believe that anyone could see beyond her scars. But standing there under the vast Arizona sky, she understood that love did not measure worth by strength or weakness. It simply saw, acknowledged, and embraced. She took a step closer, letting her hand brush against his. His warmth seeped into her, steadying her, grounding her. And in that simple touch, she realized that their hearts had already spoken louder than words ever could. For the first time in her life, Ellie allowed herself to believe that she could be loved without condition, fully, wholly, and without measure. And Taza, the man who had seen her truth when no one else would, stood beside her, offering a love that would never ask her to be anything other than herself. The sun rose slowly over the red cliffs, casting long golden shadows across the ranch. After weeks of storms, challenges, and discoveries, the world felt renewed, and so did Ellie. The air was crisp, scented with sagebrush and the earthy aroma of tilled soil, a reminder that life, no matter how harsh, always found a way to endure. Ellie moved among the horses, brushing their coats and checking their hooves. Her leg ached less with each passing day, her confidence stronger than ever. But it wasn't just her body that had healed, it was her spirit. She carried herself with a quiet strength now, one born of survival, resilience, and the love she had found in the most unexpected of places. Taza appeared beside her, his presence calm and commanding as always, yet softer in the quiet morning. He handed her a cup of coffee, the steam curling into the cool air. The ranch is ready for the new season, he said. His eyes met hers, dark and steady, full of an unspoken promise. Ellie smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It feels different now, she admitted. I feel like I belong. You do, Taza said simply. Not because of the land, not because of what we've built, but because you chose to be here. Because you allowed yourself to be seen, and you stood tall when the world tried to break you. She blinked, the weight of his words settling deep inside her. For years she had been sold, discarded, and dismissed. Her body, her spirit, her very existence had been judged as insufficient. But here, under Taza's gaze, she was no longer defined by what she lacked. She was defined by her courage, her resilience, and the love she had earned, not through obedience or perfection, but through the truth in her heart. They walked together toward the cliff's edge, overlooking the valley bathed in golden light. The horses grazed quietly, the wind whispered through the sagebrush, and the vast sky stretched endlessly above. Ellie's hand brushed Taza's, a touch both intimate and grounding. "I never imagined I could be happy like this," she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. "After everything, I thought I'd always be alone." "You're not alone," he replied, "and you never will be. Not as long as I am here." Ellie looked up at him, studying the lines of his face, the depth in his dark eyes. For the first time, she understood the full weight of his presence. Not just as a protector, not just as a man who had rescued her from cruelty and despair, but as someone who saw her fully, embraced her completely, and loved her without hesitation. The wind picked up, tugging at her hair and her skirts, carrying with it the scent of possibility. She realized that this was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a life she could shape for herself. She had endured the cruelty of her past, survived storms both literal and metaphorical, and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the love that had been waiting for her all along. Taza turned to her, offering a small, quiet smile. "Are you ready?" he asked. "For what?" Ellie asked, though she already knew the answer. "For everything," he said. "For life, for love, for the future." Ellie placed her hand in his, feeling the steady warmth of his grip. She let herself smile fully and freely, a smile she hadn't worn in years. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." Together they stood beneath the vast Arizona sky, the red cliffs glowing in the morning sun. The past, the cruelty, the rejection, the fears, lay behind them. Ahead was a life of possibility, of trust, of love. A life built on courage, resilience, and the quiet, unwavering strength that had brought them both to this moment. And in that moment, Ellie knew with every fiber of her being, she had finally found her home, her heart, and her future. The red sky stretched above them, endless and bright, a perfect beginning for the life they would build together.